The advice felt completely safe. That was the problem. For decades, financial researchers have tracked a quiet, largely invisible wealth gap, not between the rich and the poor, but between generations following identical advice. Same principles, same discipline, wildly different outcomes. And the culprit isn't laziness, it isn't spending habits. It's the specific financial rules passed down at kitchen tables, in birthday cards, in well-meaning conversations. Advice that worked brilliantly once, and now functions like a slow leak in a boat you don't even know you're sailing. By the end of this, you'll know which piece of inherited financial wisdom has statistically done the most damage, and exactly one thing you can do before this week is over to stop it from costing you another year. Let's start with the rule that sounds the most responsible, the one that feels almost patriotic. Buy a house. Always buy a house. For the generation that came of age after World War II, this was genius. Home values in the United States rose steadily and reliably for decades after World War II, outperforming most conventional savings vehicles available to ordinary households during that era. Owning a home wasn't just shelter, it was a retirement plan. It was a wealth machine. It worked so well, so reliably, that it became encoded into family identity. Renting was failure, ownership was virtue. And then something changed. By the early part of this century, researchers including Nobel laureate Robert Shiller at Yale began publishing findings that quietly dismantled the myth, data that eventually drew attention across academic economics and at major financial institutions. When you account for property taxes, maintenance costs, insurance, transaction fees, and the true opportunity cost of a down payment, according to Robert Shiller's long-run housing price research, the same dataset behind the Case-Shiller Index, the inflation-adjusted return on residential real estate over more than a century has averaged closer to 1% annually. 1%. Meanwhile, a broad index fund tracking the U.S. stock market has returned an average of roughly 10% annually over the past several decades, a figure widely documented across financial research and reflected in long-run S&P 500 return data. The math isn't close, and yet the advice persists because it felt true for so long that questioning it feels like disrespect. This is where the case breaks open. The damage isn't just financial, it's psychological. When you believe a piece of advice is wisdom, you stop interrogating it. You execute it, you sacrifice for it, you tell your own children to do it. And the gap compounds, not just in dollars but in decisions. Every year spent over-allocating to a low-return asset is a year of lost compounding you cannot get back. But the home ownership myth is only the beginning. There's a second piece of inherited advice that operates more quietly: job security. The belief that a stable job with a pension, with benefits, with a recognizable company name, that this is the foundation of a financial life. It was, once. At the peak of the defined benefit pension era, roughly a third or more of private sector workers in the United States had access to a guaranteed monthly retirement income, regardless of market conditions, a figure that has been documented by employee benefits researchers tracking coverage since the 1970s, meaning a guaranteed monthly income in retirement, regardless of market conditions. By the mid-2020s, access to defined benefit pension plans in the private sector had collapsed dramatically, with Bureau of Labor Statistics data showing participation rates well below where they stood at the peak of the pension era. The pension didn't disappear quietly. It was systematically replaced by the 401k, a vehicle that shifted all the investment risk onto the individual worker. The company kept its money. You kept the responsibility. Nobody expected what came next. The generation that had been told job stability was the goal arrived at retirement to discover the goal had been moved. The rules changed mid-game, and the advice, get a good job, stay loyal, trust the system, turned out to be a map for a road that no longer exists. There is one more, and this one is the most personal. Avoid debt at all costs. Pay cash. Debt is shame. For a generation that lived through the Great Depression, this was survival logic. Credit was a trap. Debt was moral failure. And so an entire value system was built around elimination of all borrowing, including the strategic kind. The documented reality is different. There is a category called leverage, borrowing at a low interest rate to invest in something that returns more. when borrowing costs are meaningfully lower than the long-run historical return of a diversified investment portfolio, and over long periods, that gap has often been significant. The mathematics can favor strategic borrowing over the outright avoidance of all debt. Not emotionally, mathematically. Wealthy institutions have understood this for over a century. The advice to avoid all debt, passed down with love, quietly blocked millions of households from the very mechanism the wealthy use to build wealth. Remember what I said at the start. The advice felt completely safe. Safe advice built for a specific economic era, transmitted across generations without an expiration date, is not wisdom. It's a relic. And relics, however meaningful, do not compound. Here is the one concrete thing you can do before this week ends. Pull up your current savings or checking account and calculate what percentage of your take-home income is sitting in cash or low-yield savings. If that number is above 6 months of expenses, if everything beyond your emergency fund is parked in a savings account earning less than 2%, you are following your parents' rules in your parents' economy. One option worth researching is a low-cost total market index fund held inside a standard brokerage account. For many people, reallocating idle cash beyond an emergency fund into a diversified, low-fee investment vehicle is a documented starting point. Though the right decision always depends on individual circumstances, and consulting a licensed financial advisor is the responsible next step. The advice your parents gave you came from love. That part was never the question. The question, the one worth sitting with, is this. Which piece of financial advice are you still following today? Not because you've tested it, but because questioning it feels like betrayal. This video is for educational and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute financial, legal, or investment advice. Always do your own research before making any financial decisions.